You have found the Just the Right Snowboard channel. I'm Lars Horstman, and today I want to talk to you about my favorite subject in board design, and that is board flex. Over the years, I've come to learn and appreciate how important it is to get the flex of a given shape right. And it is potentially the most important, but also the most difficult thing that a shaper is encountering when designing a board. And there's many different factors that play into how the board eventually flexes and rides. So you can't just make it stiff and afterwards design the side cut or the effective edge length. It kind of is an interplay of all these things. You change one and another one somewhat changes with it. So getting that right is really important. And what we've all done before is walk into our board shop and pick the favorite graphic and go with the old tip to tail flex and go like, oh yeah, it's nice and stiff. That doesn't do it justice, and today I'm going to explain to you why. There are so many different ways to alter the stiffness of a board or the flex of a board, and one of them is obviously a material choice, which I'm not going to go into today because we never really know what material, to which degree and in which manner the manufacturer has put into the board. If they tell you it has carbon stringers, well, how many of them? Where are they exactly? Are they on top of the wood core? Have they been laid into the wood core? There are so many little things that I don't want to focus on because it's very difficult to compare those to other boards because there are no charts or references for it. The one thing that you can, however, compare and assess is core profiling. And core profiling simply means, as every snowboard, it starts with the wood core, and that core gets milled into a particular thickness. And you can see when you look along the edge of any given board how the thickness of the wood core or the thickness of the board is getting thicker and thinner along the edge, and that gives away quite a bit of the intention that's behind it and the way it might ride. So I've got 3 boards lined up to compare flex patterns and core profiles here. That's a Salomon Hillside project shaped by Wolle Nyvelt, and that is the Taka EP in a 169. And then I have 2 Strandas here, the Pipeliner 185, Pipeliner 2.0, and then a Treesurfer in a 157. So the little disclaimer that I always want to put out here is I do work with Stranda, with the company. They give me boards and I help with sales in North America. So that's not a Stranda display show, but this is the only boards I have. And Stranda's philosophy in regards to flex pattern and core profiling is a little bit different from what the majority of companies are doing these days. And the boards lend themselves really well to point out a couple of different things here. This little snowboard channel does not have any significant sponsors yet. And as much as I absolutely love what I'm doing here, every hour I spend on it is 1 hour less that I can work in a real job and make some money to buy this girl's food here. So basically I went out and set up this little platform, BuyMeACoffee, where you can tip me for what you're seeing here. If you want to do so, I find that a much nicer way than making you subscribe to some form of Patreon with monthly fees and all that kind of stuff. So, and I'm hoping I'll make it through the winter with your metaphorical coffee tips. All right, let's continue the episode. So what you've noticed is that all of these boards are directional. And why is that important in regards to flex? If you consider a twin tip, a fully symmetrical board where the rider is standing right in the center, and the shaper wants that to be a true twin, it also has to be what it's called a twin flex. And that means that tip and tail have the same stiffness, and then the center is whatever it is. So basically you have a symmetrical flex pattern with equally stiff tips. And that's obviously so when you ride switch, the board doesn't feel any different than riding your dominant direction. So on a directional board, the focus is surely more on turning and the riding itself than getting air and spinning. And the reason why that needs to be considered in the flex pattern of the board stems from the physics of any given turn. So I'm going to dive into this right now. As you start a turn, I'm a carving guy, I love it, or powder for that matter, but turns of any kind of shape or form, that's my passion. So everything on this channel is more biased towards that and coming from that perspective of someone who turns his snowboard. So when I ride a snowboard and I'm trying to ride nice S-turns, the phase of the turn before I enter the fall line, I'm mostly at the slowest speed, right? Like I'm cruising across the hill, I steer towards the fall line, which is when I put weight onto my front foot. And putting weight on the front foot, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to flex the nose so it flexes into the turn and I actually steer towards the fall line. Now, in that phase, I am lacking speed, G-force, and I have to do all this, right? Like I have to throw my weight into the nose and flex that thing to get it to turn. If the nose is too stiff, since there are no forces that are actually helping me, that may result in a board that is difficult with entering turns. Now, I go through through the entry of the turn, steer towards the fall line. This is the phase where I pick up speed, right? So as I exit the fall line, I'm going to be much faster than here where I enter the fall line. This is also the point where I need to move onto my back foot in order for the nose to somewhat disengage so I can actually finish my turn and change edges. Now, as I do this, think of it, the forces, the G forces have amplified through the turn, and I'm moving to my back foot to pop myself onto the new edge and onto the front foot again. So that moment where I'm on my back foot, I'm potentially giving the board maximum force. Hence, I need a stiffer tail. So the flex pattern of a directional board, if it's supposed to go well with the physics of a given turn, is softer nose, stiffer tail. And then in the middle, that's a different subject, but so much for these three boards here. They all follow that principle, and the reason for that is simply they're meant to turn really well. The Pipeliner is a really good example for that directional flex because you can really see where this thing bends. When I put that board on its tail and I grab it by the nose and I push simply into the center, you will see that the board doesn't flex much in the tail at all. And that most of the flex that I'm generating here is right here, about 15 centimeters away from your inserts, all the way into the nose. That's where this thing flexes a lot. So if I just go with what I'm feeling here, I'd be like, it's kind of like a mid flex. But that's a totally wrong impression because the movement I'm getting out of my push test here is all here. So I need to do it in a different way. If I want to do this at all to judge how the board is going to ride. I personally don't think that it's a really good representation of what's going to happen on snow, playing around with pushing the board, but it does give you a bit of an idea. If you want to do it with a bit more value to it, put your arm behind one of the insert packs and push onto the other, and that gives you, in this case, an idea of the tail flex, and there isn't very much going on here, right? You can see that the tail doesn't flex much. And when I turn that around and I put it onto its nose, same thing here, arm behind the insert pack and I push onto the front inserts, you will see, aha, here's my flex. Okay, so that's my directional flex pattern. The ones among you that have gone over the bars before, throwing their weight into the nose and then folding it, they will be a little bit skeptical here. The key here is to understand where does this rather soft flex actually stop. And that's a matter of core profiling. And you can see that, right? Like you can see how this nose is quite soft, quite thin right here around the logo. From your nose contact point inwards, it's probably no more than 15 centimeters. And that's the part of your effective edge that you are flexing the most when you enter your turn, right? So this flex is wanted and needed. And then the board becomes significantly thicker towards the inserts. And you can see here how it actually stops bending there, right? My main bend is here. The Treesurfer follows a pretty similar recipe as the Pipeliner. However, the interesting part here is, first of all, it's a POW board, and we have a cutout tail. And when you see cutout tails, fish tails or swallow tails or anything, you kind of want to pay attention to how far this cutout reaches into the board. Is that cutout actually going into the area of your effective edge? So that's your widest spot of the board right here, up here. And everything from here onwards is in contact with the snow when you're riding hardpack, when you're carving, when you're turning that board. So this cutout here clearly reaches into the area of the effective edge. And that means there's going to be pressure on this part of the edge, right? And that means that because I removed material here, that's going to be softer naturally. Now, as a shaper, I need to decide, do I want that or do I not want that? If I want this bend here in that fin, well, that's great. I just achieved that by cutting this out. If I don't want that, I need to counter that either with material choice, putting some carbon in the tail, I don't know, or making the board thicker in this area, right? Like relatively speaking, thicker. There are some designs where the cutout basically doesn't reach into the area of the effective edge. You have a longer tail than on this Treesurfer, and then your swallowtail or fishtail is up here, right? So that happens as well. On those designs, that's pretty much irrelevant when you're riding hardpack, because the stability or the structural integrity of the board between the contact points hasn't changed. The cutout doesn't reach into that area. So on the Treesurfer, the tail is actually pretty solid. When I push into this, it's clearly not the same as the Pipeliner, but for a board with a cutout, there's not that much flex, which is really nice. I don't like when board designs like this all of a sudden become really washy, right? That's not a good thing when the cutout in the tail contributes to kind of like this mushy, washy tail feel under the back foot that simply doesn't fill you with much confidence when you're riding. So that's not the case here. And even if I put it onto one fin, there's not that much flex going on. So for a cutout that reaches into the effective edge area, this tail is still pretty solid. The nose, you will see here that it's very similar to the Pipeliner in regards to where the flex stops. So you got the main bend point just behind the contact point, and then in front of the front foot, it's pretty much rock solid. Now, the nose on a power board, it also contributes to float, as in when you're not going all that fast, a softer nose actually tends to just bump itself up, right? Because it flexes up when it feels the resistance against the snow. So slightly softer nose in the very tip here actually helps with uplift at slower speeds. The faster you go, the less that actually matters. And then the other thing about this is vibration dampening, or damping, is that the word? You don't, like, to make a board float extremely well at like higher speeds, you just make it stiff, right? Like think of a surfboard on water, they don't flex much either. But you need some sort of softness in the tip in order for the board to absorb all the uneven things that you come across. Most people don't ride 2 foot deep pristine powder all the time. And if you come across some buried avalanche debris or tracks from the guys around you, whatever, you want some form of absorption here. The important part is that the movement or the flex of the nose when you come across obstacles or uneven things in the snow doesn't translate into the rest of the board or into your feet. And therefore, as I just demonstrated here, this area here is pretty solid and pretty stable. The Treesurfer, for me, I'm riding the 162. When I ride it, I don't ride it all that often. I'm a bigger fan of the shorty. However, when I ride it, I ride the 162. And this board has one thing about it that is remarkable, and the flex has a big part in that, and that is that you basically feel somewhat invincible riding powder. Because that nose flexes, it helps with uplift, it absorbs vibration, and all of that stops here. Like even when I power onto my front foot in powder, I can't get this thing to sink. And hitting bumps, lumpy stuff, it never folds. So it's always safe under the front foot, and it's really solid under the back foot. And this is a matter of core profiling. It is a matter of where the board has its thickness, its meat, and its stability. Before I'm gonna talk about the Salomon Taka EP here, which is gonna be really interesting to look at, we need to envision the unthinkable here, and that is a ski. Think of the core profile of a ski for a moment. You have the tips that are really thin, and then it goes gradually thicker and thicker to the very center. And that is where the skier is placed, binding mounted in the middle. All the pressure, all the weight of the skier is sitting right there. And you know, in a simple way, looking at all the things, that makes sense, doesn't it? You push into the middle of the ski, you bend it, you turn it, you have the most weight right in the center. Why not make that ski thick right in the center? So that's how snowboards were made in the beginning as well. And eventually companies started to think, wait, that's kind of wrong. We're not standing right in the middle and putting all that weight right into the center. We actually have 2 feet and they're spread apart. And then these things came out where they were like, oh, wait a minute. Why don't we just make the board thicker under the feet, because that's where we're standing, and then we make it thinner in the middle. That's way more physically correct, I'd say. So that is true. However, there's one thing to be considered here. We are mounted on one plank. Our feet are facing across the board, are pointing across the board, and those are utilized as levers, and we are twisting the board torsionally, right? And this torsional twist can be good and bad. It depends on how you ride, it depends on your ability level, it depends on what you want from your snowboard. This is not a matter of right or wrong, this is a matter of preference and a matter of maybe ability level and purpose. And we need to think about this. We can't simply look at the ski example and be like, well, that doesn't apply to a snowboard, so snowboard should be thinner in the middle. That's too simple, as everything. Always too simple the first moment you think of it. Torsionally softer flexing boards, by making the center of the board really thin, have the advantage that they're very easy to steer at slower speeds when you are really utilizing foot steering, right? Like front foot toes, followed by back foot toes, here goes your toe turn, and then vice versa, right? This is how you're supposed to steer when you are doing it with your feet at slower speed, beginner to intermediate turns. As soon as your ride becomes a little more quick and you are actually utilizing G-force and forces in general to compress the board, like you have more speed on you, you're compressing the camber and you're pushing into the side cut and you get your board to turn and it tracks. It's more like a carving turn than like a skidded turn. As soon as you reach that level, this torsional flex, if it's overdone, can actually make the board unstable. And the reason for that is when you put a board on edge, it follows the side cut. The higher you tilt it, the more you push into it, the tighter you turn. And the turn shape is determined by the line that the edge leaves in the snow. This line changes if you twist the board torsionally throughout the turn. So a board that is very sensitive to your inaccuracies, to your imbalances, will constantly try to change its shape torsionally, and that will constantly mess with your turn shape. So having a board that is torsionally stiffer when you're really railing your turns is clearly beneficial because it makes the board much calmer. Also, when you then encounter bumps in the snow, a torsionally stiff board will track right through it on edge, where a torsionally softer board gets this moment of wobble and may throw you off. So it is a matter of preference. There's no right or wrong here, but that needs to be considered. The general thought of it should be thicker under the feet and thinner in the middle, that is simply an oversimplification. All right, Salomon Takaharu Nakai EP 169. This is a Hillside project board, and that line is shaped by no one less than Wolle Nyvelt himself, Wolfgang Nyvelt in good old Austrian. So this man has been a Salomon pro forever and a day, and he's a very, very valuable mind of our community. He started Äsmo Powsurfers years ago, and his approach to bottom contours on Powsurfers is totally next level, and those things ride like an absolute dream. I can only recommend trying one if you ever get the chance to. So Wolle, in my opinion, absolutely knows what he's doing. He's shaped a whole bunch of amazing snowboards over the years, and I don't expect this to be anything else than an amazing snowboard. So anyhow, the specs on this thing have my name written all over it. I love the length. 169 is awesome. It's advertised as a friendly powerboard, as a cruisy powerboard, so I don't expect it to be super stiff. From what I could read beforehand. 268mm waist is awesome. 7mm taper give me a slightly different flavor than what I have on all my other boards. And yeah, so basically I'm pretty stoked to get on this thing this year. And the idea was to do like a video, like a comparison review, if you will, where I compare that to my Stranda Shorty 164 wide, which is my go-to powerboard. I think the Shorty is probably going to be more aggressive, stiffer overall, but specs-wise, the boards are kinda in the same league, and I was really intrigued to try them next to each other. So that's what's going to happen later. The one thing that I didn't know about, and I only found out when I got the board, is how the core profile is actually milled. That is interesting, and this is why this board is making it into this episode. It's really interesting. So let's start with the flex test here. So doing the flex that we all shouldn't be doing anymore after this episode, standing it on the tail, grabbing it by the nose, pushing into the board. I can feel kinda, compared to the Stranda boards, I can feel a more gradual flex across the entire board, where with the Strandas I could really feel how the nose flexes more than the rest. I don't get that vibe here so much. What I do feel here is a lot of flex right under my hand, right here. I can really feel how the board is bending right under my hand. With Stranda, that's not so much the case. The signature of the brand is more that beefy, thicker, torsionally stiffer center for that really outstanding edge grip. So flexing the board this way, I can tell that's softer in the center, and I expect it to steer much easier through the feet at slower speeds. And as I said before, it's advertised as more of a cruiser, like a gentle giant type, nice, easy to ride powerboard. So that totally matches that description, right? I shall find out. Now, flexing the tail is actually pretty stiff. I want to say probably the same as the Treesurfer, at least the very tail, as in under the bindings and beyond. And then the nose is softer than the tail, but honestly, it's not much softer. I can tell that it's overall a directional flex with a softer nose than tail, But really a nose this long, that's a lot of material here. I would have expected this to have a little bit more give to it. Now, that's the thing. I don't have the flex here, but I have a flex point here. So the front of the board can actually come up. Of course, that's different because I'm actually standing here, where on the Stranda, on the Treesurfer, for example, this is flexing and I'm standing here. So you would think the softer nose here has a more noticeable effect than the board flexing from here. The other thing that you will notice when you look along the sidewall of it is that it's not only one flex point in the middle between the bindings, it's actually two. The board looks thinner right here, and it also looks a bit thinner right here. And then right in the middle is a bit of a thicker area that is probably the same as under the feet. Pretty much, maybe a little less. So anyhow, looking along the sidewall of the board, I can see what I then feel when I flex it. And as I said earlier, what that leads to is basically a softer torsional flex and overall like potentially easier to ride board at slower speeds. Now, why is there two flex points? I can only assume, I don't know. But I prefer this over boards where there's only one flex point right in the middle. So some snowboards these days are pretty thin in the middle compared to what's going on under the feet, and it's only the very center. And what those boards do to me, from what I'm perceiving, is that they, when I put them on edge and push into the center, that they kind of turn into like a bit of a V shape, as in the tips actually don't flex enough, and that is also an issue of my low weight. But the tips don't flex enough and the center just kind of folds. And that creates a strange turn shape, right? Like I don't want a turn shape that is more of a V, I kind of want an arc. So basically, having two flex points here would mean theoretically that sensation is kind of overcome. Like this board should still draw a fairly round line into the snow when you tip it on edge and push into it. What you then see when you look at the camber profile of it is that the very center, it's not simply highest, which is the case with every camber, that it's a bit of an elliptical like hump type thing going on here. It's kind of like an abrupt increase in camber height right in the center. And I kind of feel like that combining this increase here, which obviously gives the board a bit more power, a bit more pop, more tension in the middle, combined with left and right of it, the thinner sections, that almost has some form of play together, as in like maybe mellowing each other out a bit or something. I don't really know. So anyhow, like there's clearly a theme going on when you look at camber profile and core profile together. And I can't tell you right now without having ridden it how this is actually going to translate into the ride, but I can totally tell you that I'm more than curious to get on it. As I said, I trust Wolle to make a really good snowboard. And yeah, this is probably going to be one of the more fun parts of the season, to actually try something that is totally different. You may have seen Burton Squeezebox board. They have this technology called Squeezebox that is exactly this, like the idea of having the core thickness being altered in all kinds of different areas along the length of the board to manipulate the flex for a certain outcome. What I don't like about Burton's version of this is that they continue the thickness, like the high thickness of the core, all the way into the tips on some of their boards. In particular, the heavy hitter boards like the Deep Thinker or something like that, the thickness of that board right in front of the contact point is so high that like I always feel like, dang, that nose doesn't want to bend. So I'm not a big fan of the way they do it. I think this is overall a much better balanced way of altering core thickness constantly, like throughout the board. With constantly, I mean it's thinner here, it's thicker here, it's thinner here, it's thicker here, it's thinner here, and then it's thicker here again, and then it's thinner in the tail again. So that is a bit of a, there's definitely a lot going on. And I think the way it's done here on the Salomon will work for my kind of riding better than the Burton Squeezebox. All right, takeaway from today's episode is pretty simple. You need to ride different boards to figure out what works best for yourself and your riding style. I know that is not always that easy because we can't just all buy 25 snowboards to figure out what's best. But if you get the chance to go to demo events or ask your local dealer if they have demo boards, take the chance, take your opportunities and ride as many boards as you can and figure it out. Take a look at your own boards, look at the core profiling there, and maybe you can draw conclusions why you do and don't like certain boards that you have ridden before. The biggest thing here is don't fall for marketing strategies that are suggesting this is good and this is bad. Like, it's not good or bad, it's different. And different means it works for one person and it doesn't work for the other. So there's no need to judge this. It's perfectly fine to have a board that is as thick and stiff and beefy in the center as the Pipeliner. Makes an amazingly tracking carving board, but therefore there's no chance that I have the same supple foot steering that I'm likely going to have on the Takaharu, the Salomon here. So it is all a matter of how you ride and what you're going to do on the hill, and I hope this will help you to figure it out even better. Thank you for tuning in today. This episode was brought to you by me, and if you want to support me here, please subscribe to the channel, like what you've seen today, share it with your friends, get the notifications so you know what's coming up next. And I really hope that you could take away something from today's episode. At the very least, that board flex is a really complex topic. All right, I'll see you out there. Stay stoked.